Hello and good morning, good afternoon and evening to all of you. My name is Omar and I am the Deputy Secretary General of IALA. The theme of this webinar is of course the COVID-19 epidemic, and in particular how our members have been able to cope with the situation with limitations on the movement of workforce as well as considerable challenges in the supply chain. So we will start with Mr. Chris Procter with a presentation from an industrial member's perspective on managing the continuity of waste navigation production during this COVID-19 pandemic. So Chris, could you take the floor, please?
Thanks, Omar. Thank you for the introduction. And thanks for hosting. Thank you, IALA, for hosting this event. This is much appreciated and asking me to present. So this is somewhat predated in that Australia is fortunately coming out of the back end of this pandemic. So I certainly want to recognise and give our appreciation to our European and UK and US colleagues and the journey that they're going through. Now let's look at what it looked like from an Australian perspective. So our first cases were confirmed or identified on the 25th of January 2020. The Australian Formula One Grand Prix, for those who follow it, was actually cancelled 1 hour before the event was due to start on the 15th of March 2020. All Australian borders were closed to non-residents on the 20th of March, and state governments started to close non-essential services on the 21st of March. I must say it's been a really challenging time. The second wave of infections emerged in Victoria during May to June. We've gone through and come out the other side of our second, and that's resulted in 110 days of stage 3 and stage 4 lockdown. It's been quite phenomenal. The state has only just opened up on Tuesday of this week, and we had closed for basically all non-essential businesses. So that includes restaurants, hospitality, a lot of manufacturing, a lot of construction. These industries were basically put on a pilot light and suspended while the virus was attempted to be controlled. So very, very challenging times. Now, what did we do? Our first response, the first thing we did very early in the piece, and this was through that February-March period, is we established a daily COVID-19 working group, and this was really, really effective. First, we wanted to assess the situation. You can imagine, and you think back to February and March, the confusion and the amount of information or the lack thereof that was circulating in the environment. So we wanted to assess the situation, identify business risk, and certainly identify mitigation strategies, and then set actions and prioritise execution. And then, of course, keep the channels of communication open to our stakeholders. So we communicated daily. We communicated daily within the business. We had a daily newsletter going out, and we were hard at work trying to set things in place as the environment changed so quickly. And this was really important to set the cadence and the frequency of basically project execution. We covered a huge amount of ground in a very short period of time. Two key risks that we identified really fall into these buckets of health and safety of employees, and that's our first priority. And then second, of course, is business continuity, and this was the theme of our thinking throughout this whole period. I won't spend too much detail talking through our basic response because a lot of this is common. A lot of this, everybody did, but it talks to the ban on non-essential international travel, which we implemented very early, ban on non-essential domestic travel, which we also implemented very early. We restricted visitors to our sites. And we did that in a harder manner through our stage 3 and our stage 4 lockdowns just recently. In fact, we closed access, we closed gates, we put signage up. We even closed our main gate and listed telephone numbers on the gate so that we could control that ingress and egress of couriers and transportation, so that we could make sure they had the right site documentation and the right PPE in place. We eliminated common touch points, and by common touch points I mean a time clock, for instance. You can think of a manufacturing floor where production staff punch in and punch out, and we have fingerprint scanners for that purpose. So one of the first things we did is we stopped the time clocks. and we just had a trust system where people came to work and they left, but we didn't want the congestion at these time clocks, and we also didn't want people using these common areas or common touch points. Another example is just coffee. We replaced jars of communal coffee with single satchel serves. We rostered shift work, and we did this in the Australian site and the US site, where we physically cut our manufacturing labour in half, and we ran a day shift and an afternoon shift. We did this for two reasons. One, to limit the amount of congestion in the building at any one point in time, and that's congestion in the manufacturing area, as well as congestion around lunchrooms and facilities. But we also did it for redundancy, and we continue to do this in certain areas of the business. If we have a chain of transmission, or if we have a positive case, we didn't want to lose the entire workforce, and that's a way that we've maintained this, this operational status in splitting out these rosters and this shift work. PPE, of course, and supplies, a full-time contract cleaner, and then Perspex safety screens. That's really, common stuff. A lot of people are doing that. What I did want to focus on in this presentation is some of the specific measures that we have done, which might be unique in the industry, and it might be some learnings or some takeout that other people in this audience might take away and want to implement in their own businesses or organisations. This included the establishment of safe zones, a special leave policy, contact tracing within the building, support, of course, of working from home personnel, managing offsite hazards, and then finally our COVID safe plan. I'll start with the establishment of our safe zones. What we wanted to achieve, and what we did achieve in this area of work, was to isolate work areas in the manufacturing facility. So basically we wanted to restrict movement across the facility and most certainly limit contact points. So what does that mean? It really means that if you're working in one area of the business, you're expected to stay in that area of the business, use the lunchroom and the toilet facilities in that area, and not cross to other areas of the building. What this does, and it continues to do so, we've got this policy in place as we speak, provides redundancy if there is a confirmed case. So we don't lose the entire site. It's only one area of the site that may have to be quarantined. And the second thing it does is it limits the chains of transmission. If we've got less people moving throughout the entire facility, we've got less chain of transmission. So what does that look like practically speaking? Well, this is our general production floor. So we would say in this area, our production workforce have to use these toilets, this lunchroom, and really cannot leave. We have runners, so each area nominates a runner who actually wears a different colour high visibility shirt, and they have permission to move from area to area to transfer product, to communicate, just those general requirements of the movement, but we restrict that to a certain number of people. We then have a tool room where we do our CNC, high precision machining and other types of fabrication. They're isolated or quarantined to that area. Our rotational moulding and our foaming area, that team is isolated to those parts of the building. And then of course the office staff. Now the office staff became a moot point as we shifted people to a work from home environment, but the purpose here is that the office again stays in the office and uses the lunchroom facilities and uses the restroom facilities. And that's actually worked really, really well. We also implemented a special leave policy, and this is something that we did very, very early. I would say as early as March, April. So what is our special leave policy? It was 2 weeks, or it is 2 weeks extraordinary leave entitlement that's not deducted from an employee's leave balance, and that includes casual staff. So in Australia, casual labour generally do not accrue leave. They don't accrue annual leave, etc., or long service leave. But we wanted this entitlement available to all people that were working in the building. Why? We wanted to prevent the risk of workplace transmission and encourage employees to isolate when required. So the purpose of this was if an employee did not have a sufficient leave balance or was just reluctant to use it, we still wanted them to go and get tested if they developed symptoms. We still wanted them to isolate and quarantine if a family member had symptoms and had to be tested. So that for that purpose, we thought a special leave entitlement would encourage it, because there was no longer a disincentive to do it, because it wasn't drawing down on their leave balance. And we also thought it was fair. You know, if we're directing a staff member into isolation, maybe above and beyond what the government requires, or if we're closing a facility or directed to close a facility and a staff member doesn't have enough leave as a balance, well, we thought, well, it's fair if we can just do something to help out. So some examples of an application of our special leave policy. If a staff member has been in contact with someone who is confirmed as COVID-19, if they've been in close contact of somebody who's suspected, if a member of their immediate household is being tested, if they have to care for a member of their immediate family who is confirmed to have COVID-19, if they have a suspected case and are waiting results, if they test positive and they need to quarantine until they test negative, or if we direct them to remain away from work under either government requirements or our own requirements, or finally, if we were directed to close. So they're all the examples of applications where our special leave policy would apply. And that's been a real success, particularly in the early days of this pandemic when the testing took so long to turn around. We've gone from 1 week to have tests turned around and confirm a positive or negative to now shorter than a 24-hour period. So certainly in those early days, this was really, really important. Contact tracing. We started contact tracing in the building very, very early. So what does this look like? It's as simple as a single page form that every staff member completes after every shift or every day. And they simply write their name, their department, their supervisor, the date and time, and who they've interacted with. And this allows us to contact trace if somebody is tested positive and are put into isolation. So it's really, really important that we can have these measures in place and quickly clamp down on any outbreak in the building. The next area I was going to talk to is just the support for working from home employees. In March 2020, so March this year, the government, our Victorian government, put out guidance that if you can work from home, you must work from home, and this hasn't changed. So we've got a lot of team members who have been working from home since March, and that comes with all sorts of challenges, you know, both personal challenges from a staff member's perspective, to productivity and business challenges from our perspective. So this is a really, really important area for us to be able to give some support. So some of the considerations, certainly health and safety. In Australia, when an employee works from home, both the employer and the employee still have the responsibility to maintain a safe workplace. So we have to ensure that their home office is a safe workplace to the extent that they would have been working in one of our facilities, as far as it's reasonably practical. So what does that mean? Physical space considerations. We've got to be aware of power cords and equipment and trip hazards and all those things that you would consider in an office environment, but maybe not consider at home. Ergonomic considerations, seating and size, height of screens and keyboards and so forth. Also recognising the limitations of home offices. So when you think working from home, you immediately think a home office, but that's not the case, because in most of these environments, it's both partners, a husband and wife, working from home, plus potentially homeschooling. So in most cases, our work from home environment is the end of a kitchen table or the end of a bench, not so much the home office, which is generally occupied by somebody else. So there's a lot of ergonomic considerations to take into consideration. Mental health is a really big one. And again, I stress that we've got a lot of team members that have been working from home since March. So balancing that pandemic stress, the isolation, as we've come out of stage 4, Victoria residents have not been able to travel outside of a 5-kilometre radius from their home. We've only been able to exercise for 1 hour a day. And these types of restrictions have been in place for over 100 days. So the mental health of our workforce is something that we've really, really got to be mindful of and consider. Add on top of that work stress, add on top of that homeschooling stress, and it's really, really challenging. Other considerations from a business perspective, certainly managing working from home and supervisor training. So I've done it before. I didn't enjoy it. I find it far less productive. And at the other end of the spectrum, you can work many, many more hours. So managing your own work from home setting actually controls the type of work you do, the hours you do, physically closing off at the end of the day and not having it creep right into the evening. So there's that personal management, and then there's the supervisor training. And we put in place some training mechanisms of, okay, we now have supervisors with a remote workforce. How do we ensure they're as productive, as practical as possible in this whole new operating environment? So we put some supervisor training in place to make sure that people could understand their roles and some of the expectations that go along with it. Certainly the provision of equipment. I remember the day quite clearly in March, April, when we literally had office members en masse walking out into the car park carrying their desktop PCs and carrying their screens, physically taking the hardware from the office into their car and driving home. And certainly the provision of equipment and trying to secure desks and furniture. And we had people coming back to the building just to take their own chairs because they were more comfortable than what they had at home. That's been a challenge. And then one of the things that is generally not considered is this idea of data security, internet crime, and confidentiality. So we can control confidential documents and the security of data within a building, but when we have team members working from home with access to sensitive equipment or sensitive data, payroll information and personal information and so forth, that has to be handled with the same duty of care as though they're operating from the office. Internet crime spiked, as everybody I think knows, during the pandemic. As we've got a disassociated or a dislocated workplace, it makes people vulnerable for phishing attempts and hacking attacks and all sorts of internet crime. So the incident of internet crime certainly went up. So our level of awareness and training and acknowledgement has to match that. So some of the practical steps that we did, certainly a workplace checklist. So every staff member who's gone to work from home has to complete a health and safety checklist, from the ergonomics to their setup to the workstation setup, all of those things. That's a requirement that has to be completed and then sent back to their department manager. If there's any issues that are presented, our health and safety coordinator can get involved to make sure that some of these risks are mitigated. Simple as frequent check-ins. That's one of the practical steps that we've put in to support. So not from a manager's perspective, but somebody else just checking in with that staff member to make sure that they're okay and there's no challenges that they're, immediate challenges that they're meeting or need to overcome, and just keeping those lines of communication open. Other area of staying connected is a platform called Yammer. So we use an internal social network. So we set up this page or this stream called Surviving COVID-19, and every staff member's got access to it. And here we just posted, fun events and things that were going on during the last 9 months. People have had babies, people have had major milestones and big birthdays and things like that. So we just wanted to keep the communication open and that Sealite or that business environment still sound with those relationships. So that's been a good tool to try and keep people connected. Care packages, we sent a whole bunch of care packages out to team members, which is simple as a mug and a bag of sweets and a Sealite branded face mask, just so that they know we still care. We've run some MS Teams calls of a Friday, so we would have an all-staff update on sort of a 4:30 p.m. or whatever it might be on a Friday afternoon, and then carry over for drinks, where we will literally have a beer over Zoom and still try to keep that social engagement with the team. And then we also have access to our employee assistance program. This wasn't new. We've had for quite a number of years now a relationship with a firm called Positive Psychology in a nearby suburb. This is a counselling and a psychology service that to Sealite staff members. So if people are finding challenges either in their work life or personal life, we have complimentary sessions that we support with Positive Psychology. So it's not new, but it was just shining a bit of a spotlight that this service is available. And if anybody just needs a little bit of extra support or a bit of help, it's there. So there's some of the practical steps that we put in place to try and overcome some of these issues that have arisen with employees working from home. But I must just say our team's done a wonderful job. I really feel for, I only lived it for 3 or 4 days, but I really feel for the team members who have spent many, many months now working from home in that environment, and I look forward to welcoming them back to the office. Managing offsite hazards. This is a big one. This is the recognition and management that COVID-19 exposure is actually a site hazard. And so what we've put in place is an element of our site risk assessment that's dedicated to COVID. So we just treat COVID as a risk that needs to, or as a hazard that needs to be identified, and control measures need to be put in place to mitigate that. So that might be working in an enclosed space with a client. It might be vehicle requirement or vehicle usage and congestion and PPE access at site. So this now sits in our health and safety risk assessment record as part of everything else that we would assess with site work. And in this situation, it's not only active site work for a customer, it might be onshore or offshore, but it's as simple as visiting a supplier. We still expect a COVID risk assessment to be put in place if somebody is doing work at a supplier site. And then finally, just to close off on our COVID safe plan. So this is an expectation that was put in by the Victorian government on the 13th of September. And as part of our business reopening, it became mandatory for every Victorian business to have a COVID safe plan. And that's got to demonstrate our actions to help prevent the introduction of COVID-19 to the workplace. It's got to talk to the type of face masks or PPE that are required in the workplace, and then how we would prepare for and respond to a suspected or confirmed case, and then how we'll meet all the requirements set out by the Victorian government. So this is a legal document that every Victorian has to maintain to open. It's signed off by the CEO. We asked for a copy of that document if we have contractors on site. We want to cite their COVID safe plan. Likewise, if we go to their site. So this is an active, living, breathing document that sits inside the business. I'm really pleased to say that it took no more effort than just completing the fields after all the work we had done. So it was really pleasing to sit with the COVID team at the end of that big journey to be presented with a COVID safe plan template by the government and really know that we're already doing all of that. That was quite pleasing because it gave us the feeling that we'd addressed it, to the best of our ability. That's the end of my presentation. Thank you for your time. And again, I'd just like to reflect on our colleagues in the US and the UK and Europe and the challenges that they're experiencing. And I wish you all well.
Well, thank you very much. Thank you. Chris, excellent presentation, and personally, I'm a bit blown away by everything you have done. It's very impressive in my opinion. What is left for me to do is to thank you all and say goodbye and see you next time. Thank you.